Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is well and you have a drink of some description in front of you and maybe a pen and paper just in case you've got some questions to ask as we go through. So the format of these Q&A sessions are really simple. We ask you for the questions and then we respond to them. And you can also ask for some follow-up questions. So if you can go to the meeting chat and first off, just let me know that you can hear me okay. And also that you know where the chat is. So if you've got any questions to ask, you can. Perfect, they're coming in now. Lovely. If you can hear any snoring in the background, it's got nothing to do with health and safety. I have a very sleepy puppy behind me that is snoring. So I just thought I'd get that out there before Kevin might hear her, but she is snoring.
As long as you've done a risk assessment.
You might also see that Kevin seems to be having a bit of a disco with his camera. So what we'll do is we'll just do introductions from Kevin, and then he'll probably turn it off so there's no distractions and you can hear what's going on. So without further ado, I will introduce you. So most people know who I am. I run Kate Underwood HR in training, looked after human resources for approximately around 25 years. I've done operational stuff as well as HR, so I'm very well versed with health and safety, but I do know my limits, which is why we work with the lovely Kevin Jones, who I'm going to introduce you to now, who can explain who he is and what he does.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Kevin Jones. I own HSE National Limited. I've been involved in health and safety since about 1995 when I was serving in the British Army. And we happened to be in Bosnia, and the brigadier said to me, "Kevin, you're now the health and safety officer." And I said, "What's that?" So from then on, for the next sort of 11, 12 years in the Army, I was the health and safety, environmental, fire officer, etc., etc. When I retired from the Army, I went as an ops director for a large facilities company. And one of my main roles was health and safety, environmental, auditing, etc., etc. And then when we moved south 5 years ago, I decided that we'd go out on our own. And that's when HSE National was born. Best thing we ever did. We now have a massive client base from small plumbing and heating companies, electricians. Why my biggest contract is probably an IT company in London who have offices in London, Manchester, and Manila. They haven't asked me to audit the Manila office yet, but that's hopefully going to come.
Manila's lovely.
I've got big engineering companies in Birmingham, Farnborough Airport. So yeah, it's a massive range. It's very, very diverse. So that's me. Looks like my camera has decided to behave itself, so we'll leave it. We'll
just leave it as it is.
I think it's the problem of living out in virtually in the sticks. The internet's great at all times. Yeah.
Bless you. So are you technically lone working then, Kevin?
I am in my home office.
Yeah, I think HR and health and safety have got very much similarities, as in it's such a diverse topic to talk about. There is so much, hence why we asked anyone that was online or wanted to join us to ask questions so we could actually make the session really bespoke to them.
Yep.
So let's start with our first question, which is, our business is growing and will soon have over 10 employees. What implications does this have for our health and safety requirement?
If you're growing to over 10, what you should have done at your 5th employee is actually put all your health and safety procedures in place and written down. So what the law says is, if you've got under 5 employees, you still need health and safety policies, etc., but they don't have to be written down. You can obviously just learn them verbatim. What I say to people is that if you can remember pages and pages of documents verbatim, fantastic. I recommend to everybody that they're written down from day one when you've got 1 employee. That means that when you get to 5, all you have to do is get your new employees inducted and get them to actually carry on with the normal health and safety. So if you look at, this is obviously a fairly small business. So if you look at what they would need, They need a health and safety policy statement, which is a 1 page. This is what I'll do. You need a policy, 3 or 4 pages about what you're going to do in more detail. Arrangements and procedures, which says, I understand asbestos, etc., etc. In this modern age, and this goes hand in glove with HR, you need an alcohol and drugs policy, but it would be tailored towards the workplace, not more, not the sort of the HR type thing. And then you'd need fire policies, and dependent what you are and what you do and where you are, you then need to go into more detail. So, for example, an old building, you'd need to have an asbestos survey done, asbestos register and policy. If you've got forklift trucks, for example, you need to make sure that all you guys are trained. You've got health and safety policies, and also all your equipment that you've got. So this is what a lot of people forget. Statutory law says that you have to have the likes of forklift trucks, palletizers tested every 6 months, and that's what people tend to forget. It's like a lift. A lift is classed as the same, and they have to have a statutory test. And there's a lot of companies out there that actually do that. So basically, it's no great difference between 5 and 10, because you should have put everything in place at 5. A lot of companies don't, because they're not aware of what the implications are. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that the buck stops at the top. So if the managing director, for example, hasn't put things in place, he's on holiday in America, and an employee has an accident, he's liable. Doesn't have to be in the factory or in the country. He's the main man, so he's actually liable for the company's behaviours. Also, I'm going to turn the camera off. It's starting to jiggle again. There we go. Okay. Oh, that's a nicer picture. Yeah. So basically, the other thing that people forget is that the fines are absolutely massive. It's now you can be fined 10% of your turnover. So if you look at Southern Water, 3 years ago they got fined, I think it was 25 million for putting sewage into the sea. End of last year they got fined another 90 million for doing exactly the same. It is the fines are absolutely massive, and the hierarchy of the company, particularly managing directors, can now be personally liable, and they can actually get fines themselves or actually go to jail. There's a couple of managing directors in the Midlands jailed last year for 2 years because they had a death in the factory. And what had happened was the security video had filmed the same thing happening with the directors watching it. Next week, somebody died, and the directors both went to jail. Happened to be a husband and wife. Yeah. So that's the bottom line for that is. Yep.
I was literally reading before we came on the webinar today about Australia. I don't know whether you've seen that yet, Kevin, where they found some radioactive material that had been misplaced during transport.
Yes.
And their fines are woefully low, like £575 for dropping a bit of cesium-137. So although it's a lot of money for fines, I think it's right, because it's people's lives at the end of the day that you're dealing with, and you can't put a money on that. So and I completely agree now that it's a percentage of what the company earns, because again, if you've got a company that's a small business and they get a fine for £575, that's a huge amount. If you've got something like BP, they'll just go, okay, that's fine, that's just our coffee bill for the month. So I do completely agree with that now. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. What records needs to be kept for each employee?
Okay, it obviously depends on your type of business, but every employee needs training to do their job. So if we then take a guy who's making, he's in a factory and he's making pans, for example, that person would need to be have PPE, protective equipment. You need to get the person to sign to say they've received their PPE. And the reason we say that is that, and you keep them for 10, 20 years or whatever, if you go back to 30, 40 years ago with asbestos, people brought the overalls home. They got washed and went back to work the next day, and they didn't actually have any records of your PPE being given to you. And so people found it very hard to put a claim in when they got asbestosis. So what we say is now keep all the records, and then if somebody says, "Oh, I've injured my foot and you didn't give me safety shoes," you can actually say, "Well, actually, I did give you safety shoes. You obviously chose not to wear them." So PPE is the first one. All training records. So the guy is making pots and pans, making sure he's been trained on the machinery that he's using to make them, making sure that he's done or had the correct risk assessment done for making the pots and pans, the method statement of how he makes it, and all those must be recorded and any other training that he does. So, for example, if he's the forklift truck driver as well, his license will be kept on file, and his retraining. And most, it actually says 3 to 5 years, but most places do retrain them. Forklift truck, for example, every 3 years. So anything that the employer does must be kept on file for every employee. And also, more importantly, after they've left you, they must be kept as well. Because a lot of people wait till they left a company, then they'll put a claim in for something they said they did 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also from an HR perspective, there's two things. One is if it's not signed, it's not been done in my mind, because if you go to an employment tribunal or you go to court for whatever reason, they'll say, show me that this person knew, and then unless there's something signed or proof that they've done something. So we use an HR system within our business and our clients' businesses that helps to log all of that training. In addition to doing those reminders for you, because with all the best will in the world, nobody's going to remember everything. So when you upload stuff into it, it will then say your forklift truck's due in 2 years' time. It will give you that reminder, and you can choose how often that is. So it could be 6 months beforehand, depending on how difficult it is to get the retraining in and organised. So I know at the moment there are some areas where it's really difficult to get the training because they've got a shortage of people to train it. But from that perspective, so we find that really helpful, and also online training for some things as well, because it's auditable, and you can see when somebody's done something. But from my point of view, and I don't know what you feel, Kevin, I think some things can be done online, but other things can't be. And there has to be some face-to-face interaction with that.
Yeah. So if you think during the pandemic, all the training went online, absolutely everything. People did first aid training online. And what I used to say to my clients is that's better than nothing. However, when we get back in the classroom, you're going to go back and do it face to face, because you can't do resuscitation, for example, online. Yeah. But yeah, other training. I've done quite a few online courses, particularly during the pandemic. I did some mental health courses a couple of weeks ago, and online, that's absolutely fine.
No.
Just wanted to go back to records. 3 years ago, we always used to say when you signed, it was always, I've read the following risk assessments, and you sign your life away. Then I say about 2.5 years ago, there was a court case where an employee took the employee to court because he'd had an accident, and the judge said to the employee, "Did you understand what you'd read?" He went, "No, I haven't got a clue. I'm dyslexic. So no, I didn't understand it at all." He went, "Oh, okay, but you said that you read it." "Yeah, well, I read it best of my ability, but I didn't understand it." And so the judge found for the employee. So from that day on, we always say, when you do your documentation, it's got to be, I have read and understood the documentation. Also, if you've got, just say, let's take a Chinese restaurant where only the owner speaks English, and you've got all the employees in there, you have a duty to give them the documentation in their own language. So that's a sort of a Chinese restaurant's a good example. But if you think now, we've got a lot of Polish employees around, etc., etc. So you just need to make sure if English isn't their first language, they're not 100%, you do give it to them in their own native tongue. and that's dead simple to do. We all know, a bit of Google, okay, Word changes it to to the language. And when I've done it for Chinese restaurants recently, it's quite strange. Looking the health and safety policy into Chinese. So
Yeah. No.
yes,
Having worked in hotels for 15 years, I'm very well
yeah,
versed in having to do stuff in many different languages. And actually, there's a couple of places that we've got that can do online training for certain things. So, like with Kosh and health and safety and manual handling, which again is
yes,
really important to do. But if you can't obviously, if I was training it, I wouldn't be able to do it in Chinese and then Polish and then what have you. But it does translate it into different languages, so they can do it in their own language, which is great.
yeah.
But no, it is really important that people do understand in whatever language they are. Okay, so next question. Do I need a single person to be responsible for health and safety, or can it be a team effort?
Okay, so the law says that every company has to nominate a single point of contact for health and safety. If they haven't got a person within their company, they can appoint an outside consultant like myself.
Yeah,
And that's what a lot of companies do because they've spent years and years cutting workforce back. And health and safety was that, oh, yeah, Bill, you're doing health and safety this week. So they've actually gone out to me as a consultant, and I am then their competent person. It is a team effort as well, because if you take risk assessments, for example, when you're starting to write the risk assessment, the first thing you should do is consult with the people who are actually doing the task. It's pointless writing a risk assessment in an office and then not consult the people on the ground, because they might say, actually, if you do it that way, you're going to cause accident. This is the way you actually do it as per the manual. So it is always a team effort. Likewise, your health and safety meetings should also have a member from the shop floor, for example, if you're a factory, i.e., and or the union rep. Union reps are coming actually quite thin nowadays. So it's normally a person that the employees have said, oh, can Bill go and be our rep on the meeting this month, whatever.
yeah.
But to answer your question, single person needs to be nominated. And actually, in your health and safety statement, you'll actually say who that person is.
Yeah. With regards to health and safety meetings, then, Kevin, when should companies start doing those? Is that when they've got over 5, over 10, straight away? What would your advice be on that, and how regularly?
Right. So every company should have a health and safety meeting, irrespective of how many employees they've got. What a lot of companies do, assuming that they're a limited company, is that when they have their yearly directors meeting to share dividends or whatever, they put it on the agenda for that meeting. So that's what a lot of companies do. And then the frequency of health and safety meetings really depends on what you do.
Yeah.
I go this, say in Birmingham, they make handmade pots and pans, very expensive pots and pans. You're going to pay £500 for a frying pan because they're handmade in copper. We have a health and safety meeting every month.
Yeah.
Managing director chairs it. Every single manager's there, and he has workshop people in there as well. He has the accounts director, and he basically leads it from the front, stresses the importance of health and safety, then hands over to me to chair the meeting, which is acceptable in the health and safety world. If you are a office-based company who do HR, for example, okay, twice a year, even once a year is acceptable. However, what we always say is when you have your team meetings, if you have a team meeting every month, just mention health and safety. Always put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Just say, hey guys, great month, no accidents, keep it up. So and make sure that you document it, that you've actually had it on your agenda for your team meeting. And good practice is at your board meeting, for example, or your health is always the first item on the agenda after the welcomes. So that's that's basically health and safety meetings. No set agenda. I give companies an agenda, but really it's the what we're going to do training wise, what activities are coming up, investigate or discuss accidents. The only thing you've got to be very careful about is, because the managing director's in that meeting and he could be liable for a court case, if you then start to get through one which you know is going to court, you just simply record it as the meeting's aware of this, however, not discussed due to the ND being in the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really industry dependent.
Perfect. Okay. I only have 2 employees. Do I need a health and safety policy? I think we might have gone over that one.
Yeah. So just to reiterate,
Yeah.
Under 5 employees, you do need a policy, but it can be verbal. I personally want to write it down because I can't remember a couple of pages verbatim. And also, if you've got 2, if I just backtrack a bit, it's very easy to get to 5 employees. Okay. So I'm the director. My wife's the director. I have an admin person. Okay. And then I have other consultants who work for me. So straight away, it's so easy to get to 5 employees. So it's just, and then obviously you've got your accounts people. So it is just easier to write it down from day one.
Yeah. And on that, consultants, they are included in the number of people, even if they're not employees?
Very, very fine line. Okay, particularly the new contracts at this moment in time. I always say that the consultant needs to be included, because if that consultant has an accident while being consulting for you, obviously you as the employee, or as the employer for that person for that day, would be liable.
Yeah, no. That's what I thought. I just wanted to check, because we've got some, again, small businesses that are growing. They will start to use consultants when they're starting to grow, and it's just making sure that they are keeping that risk reduced of anything. So that's good. Thanks, Kevin. So this is obviously quite an interesting one since COVID. So all my workers are remote. Do I need to do risk assessments?
The answer is yes. So, and this hasn't changed for some years. If you have an office in your house, which most people have nowadays, even before COVID, your company is responsible for making sure that you have in your house what you need to do your job. Now, basically, that is a desk, a suitable desk, a suitable chair, and obviously a suitable IT system. The policies were a bit outdated, because it still talks about giving you a dedicated fax line if you need it, so you're not using your own private line. Obviously, those days have gone.
I was going to say, I can't remember the last time I sent a fax.
Yeah. But obviously, what they do need to do is make sure they've given you the equipment to be able to work from home. And also, they must do a risk assessment. And so the risk assessment is a self-assessment, and that covers things like, is my office upstairs? Yes. Are the stairs suitable to walk up? Is my office full of beds or whatever you mean? So it's just making sure that the office is suitable to do your job. Because once again, over COVID, so many people sat at the kitchen table and worked. And then what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years' time? All these people are going to be saying, "Oh, I've got a bad back because I was at my kitchen table. You didn't give me a proper desk." So yeah, it is absolutely vital that you do the risk assessment. Also, just make sure you do a display screen self-assessment as well, because that only does only start that again. It obviously covers you in the office, but obviously you need to do it from home as well, because you might have a sit-stand desk, or you haven't got this or whatever. So you need to make sure that you have done your display screen equipment, and things are pat tested.
Yeah.
So so you might be the fact of your laptop might have been tested, or your desktop, whatever you've got, but it's the other ancillaries, where it's your company mobile phone charger, things like that. Now, what a lot of companies have started to do, if they've got hybrid working, they'll have an in day once a month, or perhaps 2 days a month, and split the workforce down. They've started having, like, on the second one of the month, bring everything with you, and they have a pat testing company there waiting to do everything.
Yeah.
And they'll do that, until they know that every single person has had the equipment pat tested. It's silly things that you forget. I've got a light on here at the moment on my desk, you know, and if the company provided that, you know, they'd obviously need to have that pat tested as well.
But it's only things that the company provide that need to be pat tested, correct?
By law, okay.
Yeah.
However, if you take, let's go back to the office environment. If you take your personal mobile phone charger into the office and charge your phone from the company's electric, that charger would need to be pat tested as well.
Got yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. It's a very that one is a minefield, I think, at the moment, and we get
Yeah.
quite a lot of questions from clients asking us. I even remember during COVID, we found out that one of the employees was using an ironing board as a desk.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, but at the end of the day, they were living in a one-bedded flat, which they just didn't have space for a desk. But it was during COVID and it was pushed, so it was just a case of they were doing as much as they possibly could. So we were trying to look around to see what else they could be utilising rather than an ironing board. I thought it was quite ingenious because they could lower it and make sure it was the right height.
That, you know, it's fine.
So, but obviously it's not got the right depth that you need. But yeah, it was something. So we had to do a little bit of work with them. But yeah, it was interesting during COVID, and I think that's going to happen more and more now that I mean, companies like Twitter and that have just said, right, everyone's working from home now. We're not going to have offices. So, and I think there's much more of a hybrid workplace. And I think the majority of things that we're finding, it's the new starters. So although we've done it at the end of COVID or during COVID and made sure everyone's had their stuff done, it's making sure that when you're onboarding new people, it's capturing that, I think.
Yeah. So when I do health and safety inductions for companies, we actually make sure that DSE and working from home is a standard. I mean, go and do that risk assessment straight away. And some companies actually send them out in advance with a welcome pack and say, because you are going to be home based 90% of the time, on your first day when you come into the office to get onboarded, bring with you your DSE assessment and your risk assessment for working from home.
If they haven't got their laptop yet, though, they can't do that, can they?
Well, you can do paper copy. My experience is that, which is probably a legal thing about it, but they would tend to send a contract, for example, to your private email address.
Yeah.
And then obviously get it signed and scanned back or whatever. So it is acceptable to send it to a private email address before the person.
No, I don't mean that. As in, if they're doing a DSE assessment, they can't do it because they've not got the company equipment.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think you said yeah. I'm just working the fact that most people have got a laptop anyway.
I would have thought so. Yeah, it's just sort of like just making sure if they don't. Okay, next question. How often should we review risk assessment?
Risk assessments need reviewed at least once a year before they run out. But also, if there's an incident or accident, you must review the risk assessments as soon as possible as part of the investigation process. So if you have 5 accidents in a year, it would be been reviewed 5 times. And then obviously the yearly review as well.
Okay. And when you go in and you're the health and safety consultant for employers, if you're doing risk assessments for them, what would your process be for that?
So depending on the industry.
Yeah. Say it's I don't know, an office environment. Let's just keep it simple.
Yeah. So what I do is go in, meet the management, get an overview of the company, of what they do. I then get the management to show me around the working environment. I'll make notes on the way around of what we need to do, and then I'll then ask the company to get the relevant person, just say reception, to come and sit with me in the meeting room, and we'll go through the risk assessments that are needed on reception. So that's the sort of process we do. The biggest areas, if you take an office, the biggest risk is the person on reception. That somebody could, in theory, smash the door in and assault the person on reception, or they could obviously, once again, assault the person with a needle or whatever. So you need to make sure that you've got things in place to protect the person on reception. The next biggest area of issues is the office kitchen, because people will have left the kettle full of boiling water because they filled it up too full or whatever. The next person comes, doesn't realise, takes the kettle to fill it up and upsets hot water on them. That's the sort of biggest problem areas within the office. Slips, trips, and falls because people leave their handbags next to the desk, should put in their locker. I'm not just picking on the ladies there. Okay, so then
No, it could be the dog that you trip over as well.
Yeah, the dog. Yeah. Cable management's absolutely vital. I was in a place recently, and they had, I think it was 3 extension leads into each other and then into a single socket. And the extension leads had 5 plugs in each. So they had basically 15, actually the computers, 15 laptops into one socket on the wall.
Wow.
And then the spare cabling was coiled up. Well, yeah, I'm not an electrician, but I know that if you leave electric cables coiled up, they catch fire. Yeah.
Oh dear.
It's that sort of, yeah. But then it's all about engaging with the people.
Yeah.
I was at a place a couple of weeks ago, and they make pontoons for boat yards. And they wanted a complete review. And the first thing we did, the managing director told me what they were doing, walked the shop floor, came back, sat down with the guys, and actually worked out exactly what they do. Because it was obvious that they were spraying stuff, but until you sat down with the main spray booth guy, who explained that actually he has to do different thicknesses of paint. So if they're sending this pontoon to the Arctic, it's obviously thicker paint than if they're sending it to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So and that obviously affects the risk assessment, because if he's spraying thicker paint, the noise levels increase, and also the fact of the way that they have to have show me with my fingers. I know you can't see me. The different respirators, making sure for the different environments.
Yeah. Okay. And when you're doing the risk assessments, because this question comes up to us a lot, hence why I'm just sort of like poking a little bit more just to try and give the people on the call some more information. If you have done the risk assessment and you found that actually there was 15 laptops in one socket, for example, and that's been put down as a risk and it needs to be done, would that be done in your monthly meetings, that you would check to make sure that had been done and it was allocated to somebody? How would that get followed up?
So if we take this example, okay, I actually went and unplugged it from the wall, and sort of took the actual extension leads away, and put them on the director's desk and said, that's what would have burnt your building down. Et cetera, et cetera. So you do the risk assessment, and I know I've changed my system very recently, and what I'll have on the second page of the risk assessment. So page 1, okay, will give you your score and what you've got to do. If it goes green, nothing else to do. Amber or red on page 2, it transfers it across. Then next to the amber or red, you have to say what you're going to do to bring it down to green, and then you actually the date you did it, and then check by. And then once again in the meetings, we always have risk assessments on the agenda. And I can go, like that risk assessment. Have you done it? Yes, we have, Kev. Thank you.
Perfect. No, that's really helpful. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, next question. How often do I need to do health and safety training?
It really depends on your industry. If you're in an office, the part of your induction would be health and safety training, and then they tend to do them on a yearly basis. So they'll have a training morning, and you'll redo your manual handling, redo your health and safety training, give you an update on fire wardens or whatever that training is. If you're then in a heavy industry, I was at a place recently who because it was such a specific job, welding, they had to send off an example of a weld every month to the industry specialist to say that person was still competent to do that weld. And so, you know, and if you then go out to oil rigs, etc., a lot of people, when they start their 10-day shift, the start of that shift is, okay, they will do half a day's health and safety training every time they step onto that rig. But the law is actually yearly minimum.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, let's
Perfect.
say, you know, if you're on a rig, you obviously do it as you need to.
I was going to say when I worked on cruise ships, we did it weekly,
Yeah,
just to make sure that we were okay.
yeah,
Okay, so first aid is also something that crops up quite a lot. So I'm glad
yeah.
somebody asked this question. I've got 4 employees. How many first aiders do I need to have?
Right. The first thing you need to consider is your hours of operation.
Hmm.
So if you are 24/7,
Hmm.
you have to have a first aider available all the time. So if you've got a morning shift, an evening shift, and a night shift, for example,
Hmm.
so you've got 3 shifts during the day, you need 3 people first aid trained per day. Then you've
Hmm.
got to take into account holidays and sickness.
Hmm.
So it's very, very hard to put a finger on 4 employees until you know what they actually do. And
Okay.
that's an office environment, and then they're 9 to 5, and you close down every summer for holidays, and nobody's ever away. Obviously, one employer will cover that dead easy. If you're in an office environment, it's like your first aid kits.
Yeah.
You very rarely get a first aid kit under 10. Then they go to the 20 employees and to massive big 50 employees. It's always better to have more than you actually need,
Yeah.
particularly if the first aider themselves as the accident.
Well, yes, I have had that before. Not
Yeah,
me, but I have had
yeah,
that before.
yeah.
And also, what level of first aid training do you need to have? Because there's
Right.
different types, isn't there?
Yeah, you have to have at least one who's trained in the 3-day
Hmm.
first aid. I don't know if St John's Ambulance have started doing them again. They used to do them free of charge before COVID, but there's a lot of private companies now will now do that
Yeah.
3-day. Then there's also a 1-day emergency first aid, but there's also now emergency pediatric. That's it, young children. Yeah, first
Pediatric.
aid.
I can't say it now. I was trying.
Yeah,
Pediatric. That's the word.
pediatric, that's the word. Yeah, yeah. So it really varies on the different environments and what you've
Yeah.
got. I always say you can never ever have too many first aid trained people.
No, I would completely agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that's not law, but a lot of companies are now getting AEDs in the workplace. You know, the defibrillators,
Yeah.
and the British Heart Foundation have now set up a ring in to say you've got a defibrillator, and they've done a map for the emergency services.
Oh,
And so
that's amazing. Yeah.
yeah, so if you ring 999 and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm on the high street in Southampton," they can say,
Yeah.
"There's a defib in Boots, you know, 20 yards away,"
Yeah.
so they can actually send them in the right direction.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
and yeah, you can do an AED course, but the modern ones or the newer ones,
They're so easy.
but you can't get it wrong.
No.
If you've got the pads on the person and they don't need shocked, it won't let you shock them.
No, exactly. They are really good. It's kind of, I don't like using the word, but it's idiot proof.
Yes, yeah,
But
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
you can't really get it wrong. I went to
yeah.
a client's the other week and they have clay pigeon shoot. And I did ask him, I said, "Are you thinking of getting a
Mm,
defib?" And he said,
mm,
"Well, I don't know." And I'm like, "Well, the clientele that you get, no disrespect, are over
mm,
50-year-old male."
mm.
And I would just like, the likelihood of them having a heart attack is
Yeah,
probably pretty high.
yeah.
Yeah, we're looking to see whether we can get one for him, but he's out in the sticks, so actually it's quite good. And there's loads of
Mhm.
farms near him.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
again, I think if people can get them, I think
Yeah.
that's really helpful.
Yeah,
But it just
exactly.
depends.
And the thing that people need to remember is that they do need to be checked. And obviously, it's the manufacturer's instructions, but normally the battery has a 2-year life on them.
Hmm.
So you need to change the batteries on them. And the other thing that has to happen is the pads have a 2 or 3 year life on them as well.
Mm.
So good practice to keep a spare pair of pads. And also in the packs, you have a razor, some shaving foam, and some gloves, so you can actually shave a man's chest if need be, and to put the pads on. And they're the ones that go missing. Okay, the amount of times I do a spot check and the razor's gone missing or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's always good practice to make sure that they're actually there.
Yeah. No. Good point. Good point. Okay. And this is the final question that we had of people asking in, but in a minute I will ask to see if anyone else has got any others. If I had an employee that had an accident at work, what do I need to do?
Right. The level of reporting and what you do depends on the accident. And so every single accident should be recorded in your accident book down to a paper cut. Okay. And so every accident instance recorded in your GDPR compliant accident book, which basically means that it says GDPR compliant at the front. Well, basically, it means that once you've filled the form in, you rip it off and file it securely. So the next person going to the accident book can't see what was put in for the last person. And what most people do nowadays is they rip it off and scan it, onto their HR file or whatever, and then just shred the accident slip. That's what most people do nowadays. And so every accident should be investigated as well. And then that really helps you determine of what level it needs to be at. And so the RIDDOR reporting is quite complex. RIDDOR is where it's a reportable accident, goes to the health and safety executive, basically over 7 days off work. And it depends on the type of injury. If you lose a finger, for example, that has to be reported. If you've lost a bit of your scalp, etc., really depends on what it is. And there's about 20 items that would need reporting as a RIDDOR. And one of the biggest problems nowadays is you no longer need a sick note for the first few days of obviously an illness. And so if the person's had an accident at work, hasn't gone to the doctor because the doctor said, oh, self-certify. So it's very difficult to get your evidence, etc. But it's normally very obvious from your health and safety person if it's going to be a reportable accident or not. Very, very easy. So you investigate the accident. So you nominate people to do it. It's got to be an independent manager, for example. So the manager of the department can't investigate an accident in his own department. You need a note taker. If it's a road traffic accident in a company vehicle, normally the police would be involved as well. And then when you get down to a serious incident, just say broken leg or whatever, I always say that I would go and do the accident investigation, because that's when you're likely to get a court case for damages. And most people nowadays know it costs you £5,000 to defend a claim minimum. And so a lot of people come in with, could have £4,900, please. And a lot of companies nowadays just pay it. I used to do it when I was ops director, because it was, it cost me so much money to faff around and get the lawyers go to court. Oh, it was just easier. And unfortunately, that's what people know. So obviously investigate the accident. We have the system I use is called 5 Whys, and you start at why did it happen, why, until you get to the that's why it happened. And so make sure that you record the investigation, get it signed off by the health and safety person, myself, for example, and also make sure that it goes onto your stats and to be reported at the health and safety meeting. Because what you should be doing as a board is setting health and safety objectives for the year. So you should set yourself a RIDDOR rate, should be 0, because nobody wants a RIDDOR. A lost time incident frequency as well, based on the years before stats. And then, toolbox talks every week, for example, if you're an industry, going out to don't walk bys or near misses, whatever you want to call them, make sure that everyone reports them, the amount of meetings you're going to have. Just set objectives for the year, Then in the December meeting, you set them for the next year. Then in the January meeting, you review the previous year. So I'm busy the January, February meetings reviewing the 2022 objectives for for the companies. And it's important because if you do have an accident and the health and safety executive come to investigate it, the first thing they'll ask you for is training records, your policies, your health and safety meetings, etc., etc. And that's before they even actually say what really happened. So it's important that everything is recorded properly. I always say to all my people on retainers, if you've had an accident, ring me and I'll tell you what to do. If it's obvious that it's a riddle, it's a riddle at the end of the day.
Yeah. But it is so important to record anything, even if it's not a riddle, because it's 3 years that people can put in an accident claim, isn't it? And usually it's 2 years and 9 months that they put it in, at which point the likelihood with turnover of staff, especially in something like retail or hospitality, they're not going to be there anymore. So having that documented at the time, whilst it's fresh in people's memories, is so important. And I had that when I was working for the hotels. I had somebody put one in 2 years and 9 months, and the GM had changed twice. And the current GM sort of like came in the door ashen faced. What are we going to do? And I just pulled an envelope out and went, there you go. I said, it's already been told to the insurance company. They've got all of this. So you just need to let the insurance company that we've got a letter and they will deal with it. So and I think that's also very important, is being that that communication that you have with your insurance company as well, and just say, look, this has happened, and then they can say, right, we need an accident report on this, or we don't need an accident report on it, depending on. But if you're asking them the question, it's always the best thing to do. Keeping them on side is a good thing.
And also always do a timeline. So from accident happened at 8 o'clock in the morning, accident happened 8:10, ambulance arrived. So really all the way through a timeline and pictures. Take as many pictures as you can.
I always say that.
Because when a claim comes in, he slipped on the oil on the floor. Well, where's the oil on the floor? So if you've got a picture of everything, picture paints 1,000 words.
I always say,
make sure that you file it and keep it.
Everyone's got a mobile phone. They can all take pictures. As long as you're not taking a picture of somebody's face, you can take a picture, especially with car accidents as well. And we have a company car policy, and at the back of it, we've got a 2-page document that, should somebody have a car accident, step by step of what they need to do. Because you're usually shocked if you've had a car accident, and you might forget things, but at least if you've got a form to go, right, I need to do this, and can I take a picture of this, then you've got the majority of the stuff done beforehand. So perfect. Okay, right, that was the last of the questions that we had in. I'm just going to ask to see whether anybody else that's watching has got any other questions that they would like to ask. I'm just seeing. What I will be doing with this webinar is I will be sending out the recording to everyone that has attended today, and I will be giving Kevin's details out as well. So this is a new partnership that we're working with Kevin. There are certain things that we know as an HR consultancy, and other stuff that we know when we need to go and ask for help. So we're very much looking forward to working with Kevin and helping our clients as well as anyone else. I don't think there's any questions because nothing has popped up. So all it's left for me to do is to say thank you very much, Kevin, for coming on today. Thank you everybody that gave questions, and if you need anything, then you know where I am, and you also know where Kevin is once I've given you his details. So please feel free just to contact us if you've got anything. Our next webinar is going to be on employment law, which is again a Q&A session. We've got Matthew Parker coming from Forest Edge Solicitors, and that's on the 8th of March at 11:30. So I'll make sure when I send it out, I'll send the link for that one too. Thanks very much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, Kate.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.